Emily sat near the back of the grand lecture hall, clutching her worn leather notebook as she tried to focus on the sprawling equations and concepts projected on the screen. The room buzzed with quiet chatter and the low hum of confidence from the well-dressed students clustered in the front rows. Their tailored suits, designer bags, and polished shoes made her feel like she had wandered into a different world. She adjusted her simple sweater, pulling it tighter around herself, wishing she could disappear into the wooden seat. At the front, Professor Langston stood tall, a man who wore his prestige like armor. His crisp gray blazer and perfectly styled silver hair gave him an air that intimidated even the most confident of the elite students. He scanned the room with a knowing smirk, clearly taking delight in the power he wielded. Emily's glance met his for a brief moment, and he narrowed his eyes, sizing her up like prey. Professor Langston cleared his throat and turned toward Emily. "Miss Carter," he began, voice dripping with condescension, "how do you interpret Keynesian economics in relation to contemporary market volatility? Or has your background left you somewhat unprepared for such complexities?" Laughter rippled from the front rows, quiet but sharp like a stiletto. The elite students exchanged amused glances, their smirks matching the professor's. Emily's cheeks warmed with a flush of embarrassment, but she bit down on her lip, refusing to rise to the bait. The professor's gaze lingered for a moment, then he spoke again. "Perhaps this isn't the arena for someone unfamiliar with how the real world operates." The crowd tittered louder, the weight of their judgment pressing down on Emily. She clenched her fists beneath the desk as the room's eyes fixed on her, waiting to see her next move. Professor Langston's words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating and sharp. The gentle rustling of pages and tapping of pens across desks had ceased entirely. Every eye, from the smug elite seated in their pristine chairs to the few quieter students at the back, was locked on Emily, who sat frozen yet burning inside. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks again, a mix of shame and frustration threatening to consume her. Yet, outwardly, she remained still, the image of composure she struggled to maintain. "Miss Carter," Langston continued, his voice a low drawl laced with menace, "perhaps I should allow you to try answering some theoretical questions. Don't worry, I won't make it too difficult. Although, I suspect that might be the reason you're struggling to keep up." His eyes gleamed with cruel delight. He turned toward the students in the front rows and added, "Feel free to offer your thoughts as well. Perhaps we could teach our guests something about economics." Hard laughter rippled among the elite students, some leaning back in their chairs as they whispered and exchanged amused glances. The room felt like a pit, a cage straining to restrict her until she collapsed under their gaze. Emily's fingers curled tightly around her notebook, thumbs pressing into the rough paper. She could almost hear her heartbeat overpowering the echoes of Langston's derision. The questions began, complex, layered, almost designed to confuse. The professor rattled off terminology in quick succession, aiming to overwhelm rather than enlighten. The students chuckled after each question, not waiting for her to answer before mocking her stumbling attempts. "Miss Carter, your understanding seems elementary," Langston sneered, "but we appreciate your effort." Some sympathetic students cast sideways glances, their discomfort evident. At least one young man near Emily muttered under his breath, "This isn't fair." But his words were swallowed by the laughter and snide remarks erupting from the wealthier crowd. Emily's attempt to explain was halting at first, the heavy spotlight made her tongue stiff. Every answer seemed to invite more ridicule. The sting of it was visceral, the hush before a joke's punchline, the knowing smiles, the pointed glances shared under perfectly arched eyebrows. It was as if her entire history, her struggles and triumphs, had dissolved into a spectacle for others' amusement. After the lecture officially ended, Emily gathered her belongings with trembling hands, hoping to slip out unnoticed. But Professor Langston raised a hand, voice sharp and commanding. "Miss Carter, a moment. I'm afraid you won't be excused just yet." Apprehension tightened her chest. She looked up to find the room's silence replaced by tense anticipation, the elite students lingering, their expressions now eager for more entertainment. Langston gestured toward the podium. "Since you're so eager to learn, how about an oral examination? An opportunity for everyone here to witness your competencies firsthand." The words dripped with sarcasm and challenge as the entire class shifted, some leaning forward as if about to watch a spectacle. Emily's throat tightened. She swallowed hard, resisting the impulse to flee. Every head turned toward her, the weight of their gazes felt unbearable. The elite students whispered among themselves, some with playful mockery, others with unexpected curiosity. The sympathetic few silently hoped she would rise to the occasion, but the fear of public humiliation loomed large. For a moment, Emily considered giving in, just admitting defeat and walking away, sparing herself further discomfort. But beneath the shame and fear, a fire flickered. She was tired of being underestimated, of being judged not on merit but on appearances. Still, facing such a formidable challenge in such a hostile environment was terrifying. "Very well," she said quietly, standing slowly and moving toward the front. Her voice betrayed none of the chaos swirling inside. The room seemed to hold its breath as she approached the podium. Professor Langston's eyes narrowed, a smirk curling his lips, evidently amused by her acceptance. The first question came, sharp and precise, designed to trip her up. For a moment, Emily hesitated, her mind racing. She recalled the countless nights spent poring over economic texts, the practical challenges she'd wrestled with in her job at a local community center, where she applied similar theories to real-world problems. Memories of late nights studying in cramped quarters contrasted sharply against the polished luxury of the lecture hall. Drawing in a slow, steadying breath, she began. Her response was measured, clear, and surprisingly confident. She peeled away the layers of the professor's jargon, translating complex economic ideas into accessible language. She cited examples and data that reflected not just textbook theory but living markets and communities. The room shifted, some of the elite students blinked, taken aback, others whispered, "Where did that come from?" Professor Langston's smirk wavered as she continued. She navigated the intricacies of market dynamics, fluctuations influenced by social variables, and even ventured into emerging economic models that challenged conventional wisdom. Her voice gained strength, the tension in her posture easing. Some students bent forward, eyes wide, captivated. Others glanced sideways at the professor, whose face was taut with disbelief and diminishing amusement. He pressed her with follow-up questions, hoping to unsettle her, but each time she parried with precise reasoning that left little room for doubt. By the time she finished, silence enveloped the room. The elite students' chuckles and snickers had evaporated, replaced by murmurs of admiration and surprise. A few whispered compliments floated in the air, tentative at first, then growing bolder. Professor Langston straightened, his earlier arrogance replaced by a grudging respect. But his tone remained trying. "Well, Miss Carter, it seems I have misjudged you." Quite the unexpected depth of knowledge for someone who appears, well, out of place. Emily did not smile or step back into the shadows. Instead, she met his gaze steadily. In economics, understanding comes from more than where you come from or how you look. It's about the work, the insight, and seeing beyond the surface. The atmosphere in the room had profoundly changed. Where earlier there had been condescension, now there was curiosity and, for some, a reluctant respect. The once aloof elite students found themselves challenged in their assumptions, their laughter replaced by thoughtful glances. Emily gathered her things again, not as one retreating but as someone who had proven herself in the crucible. She walked toward the exit to quiet applause from a few students who, until moments ago, had remained silent observers. Outside the lecture hall, the corridor's sterile walls no longer felt suffocating. Her heart still raced, but it was no longer out of fear or shame, it was the pulse of newfound confidence. Yet inside, she knew the battle wasn't over, the impressions left today might plant seeds of change, or resistance. What would you do if you were in Emily's shoes? Would you have crumbled under scrutiny, or found the courage to stand taller? The lecture hall, once reduced to whispers and awkward silence, now bristled with fresh, electric energy. Emily stood by the podium, the unexpected murmurings from the elite students sinking into the polished wood beneath her feet. She could feel every gaze, a mixture of surprise, respect, and disbelief, fix on her. Professor Langston's earlier smirk was now a guarded line, his eyes no longer the condescending tools they'd been moments before. There was a crack in his armor, and she intended to drive it further. She cleared her throat softly and began to speak, her voice steady, deliberate. Economics is often taught as a sterile set of equations and theories, but it's profoundly tied to human behavior, societal frameworks, and real-world challenges. Many of the models we study assume ideal conditions, but in practice, things are messy. They require innovative thinking and a willingness to question long-standing assumptions. The students exchanged glances. Some leaned in with curiosity, their previously amused expressions fading into concentration. Emily continued. For example, take the volatility of emerging markets. Traditional theories suggest that political instability leads directly to economic downturns. However, in my experience working with grassroots organizations in underserved communities, I've seen how localized entrepreneurship and social networks create resilience even amid political upheaval. She paused, allowing the idea to settle. Several students reached for their notes, scribbling hastily. Professor Langston shifted uncomfortably but tried to maintain his role as gatekeeper. Ms. Carter, that's an interesting perspective, but how does that reconcile with the quantitative models that dominate our field? Can anecdotal evidence override centuries of data? A small smile tugged at Emily's lips. It's not about replacing data, but enriching it. When I developed a pilot program providing microloans to small business owners in low-income areas, we tracked metrics alongside personal stories. The quantitative data showed moderate growth, but it was the qualitative insights that illuminated the true economic impact, how access to capital improved families' lives, fostered educational opportunities, and strengthened community ties. These factors, when integrated into models, offer a more accurate, human-centered view of economic systems. The room was silent for a heartbeat, then a hand slowly raised in the back. It was Michael, a student she'd noticed kept his head down before, less swayed by the crowd's mentality. Ms. Carter, your view challenges the efficiency-focused models tightly bound to numbers. It's refreshing to see the qualitative aspects given weight. Emily nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Michael. Economics affects people more than spreadsheets. Bridging those gaps helps us craft policies that truly work. Suddenly, the murmurs grew louder. The elite students, some previously smirking and whispering disparaging remarks, now exchanged astonished looks. Their previous hubris wilted under the force of Emily's articulate demonstration. The energy in the room shifted palpably from derision to admiration. Professor Langston stood, trying to regain control, but his words faltered. You've presented compelling arguments, Ms. Carter. I underestimated your insight and the depth of your experience. Emily met him without hesitation, her gaze unwavering. Respect in academics comes from curiosity and willingness to learn, regardless of our backgrounds or appearances. A group of students erupted in quiet applause, cautious but genuine. Langston's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. Behind him, some elite students approached Emily, offering handshakes and murmured congratulations. One of them, Julia, a poised and assertive woman known for debating prowess, said, I have to admit, I didn't expect this. You've definitely earned my respect. Emily smiled, grateful for the change in tone. Thank you. It means a lot. The afternoon turned to early evening as the lecture hall slowly emptied. Emily felt an unfamiliar wave of adrenaline and validation. She'd stepped into an arena that dismissed her at first glance and emerged with her voice heard, her ideas accepted. Later, as she packed her modest backpack, a few students lingered to ask questions about her experiences outside campus. She spoke candidly about her nonprofit organization, which provided educational resources and technology access for underprivileged youth in her community, a project that had recently gained national attention. It was then that a student, Nathan, pulled out his phone and showed her a familiar image, the latest cover of Forbes magazine, featuring none other than Emily herself, a commanding photo with a caption proclaiming her as one of the top 30 innovators in social impact. The photo showed her radiant, wearing a smart blazer, a far cry from the simple sweater she'd donned that day. Emily laughed softly, a mix of humility and pride sparking in her eyes. "I usually keep a low profile on campus," she said. "Travel and work take most of my time, and I prefer to focus on the cause rather than the spotlight." But the revelation seemed to shatter the lingering assumptions held by many. Those who had laughed now glanced at her with newfound awe. Professor Langston cleared his throat, stepping forward with measured steps. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology." His voice was sincere, tinged with regret. "I judged too quickly and failed to see your abilities. Today, you taught us all a lesson." Emily nodded, accepting the apology without bitterness. "Thank you, Professor. I hope this encourages more open minds here." As Langston retreated, a subtle change swept through the room. Conversations buzzed about inclusion, challenging biases, and valuing diverse experiences. Emily felt both the relief of vindication and the weight of new responsibility, inspiring change, opening doors. That evening, she walked across campus beneath the glowing amber street lamps, thoughts swirling. The laughter and judgment of earlier had transformed into respect and connections. Yet, she knew many battles remained, both personal and institutional. For now, though, she carried a quiet grin, knowing she had turned the tables. No longer just a simple student, but a voice impossible to ignore, a presence reshaping perceptions and possibilities. In those defining moments, Emily realized she wasn't alone. Others, too, would find courage to rise when underestimated. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had helped pave the way. As Emily stepped out of the lecture hall and into the cooler air of the campus evening, the fading sunset painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The moment felt surreal, from the hushed whispers and laughter at her expense to the quiet nods of respect just minutes ago. Yet amid the swirl of thoughts, a part of her yearned for something quieter, a place where her full story could unfold beyond snapshots and fleeting impressions. She pulled her simple scarf tighter around her neck and began the slow walk back to her small, modest apartment at the edge of town. The neighborhood was lined with brick houses, worn sidewalks, and the faint hum of life in the evening settling in. Nothing glamorous about it. But for Emily, it was home, a refuge carved from years of perseverance and dreams. Inside, the walls told tales of hard work and humility. Bookshelves bowed under heavy textbooks, binders stuffed with nonprofit reports, and a solitary framed photo of her parents smiling proudly in modest attire. Gifts and handmade cards from youth whose lives she'd touched sat neatly in corners, reminders of meaning beyond accolades. Emily sank into her worn couch and exhaled, the adrenaline of the day ebbing as reflection took hold. There was a deeper side to her than luxury magazine covers or academic achievements, a tapestry woven from late-night studying amid flickering candlelight during power outages, jobs juggling to pay tuition, and an unyielding belief that education could lift those forgotten by circumstance. Only a few knew the full truth. Like her mother, a school librarian who instilled the love of learning, and her father, an auto mechanic who taught her that hard work spoke louder than words. Together they had raised her to be grounded, no matter what doors opened her way. Her current university, prestigious and steeped in tradition, wasn't chosen just for its name or veneer of charm. Emily had sought it out to challenge herself, to bridge two vastly different worlds, one of Ivy League privilege, another of resilience from hardship. The stark contrast often made her feel like an outsider, but it also fueled her resolve. That morning, Emily had deliberately worn her comfortable sweater and jeans, trying to blend in and avoid attention. She wasn't interested in superficial judgments or flaunting success. Her priority remained on deepening her economic knowledge and growing the nonprofit she'd founded, a project close to her heart. Her nonprofit, Empower Next, began humbly 5 years ago with a single computer and a borrowed classroom. It now reached hundreds of young people, offering training in technology, financial literacy, and leadership skills, especially for those trapped by poverty or limited access. Emily's vision was simple yet bold: create accessible paths for those who, like her, had once been counted out. That success had drawn external eyes. Forbes' recent feature was a nod to her impact, but not the whole story. It was tempered by hard-earned lessons in judgment, subtle biases, and the constant need to prove that quiet determination could outshine privilege. To Emily, the cover was never about vanity. It was a platform to amplify voices ignored by mainstream narratives. Her modest appearance during the lecture, far from contradictory, was emblematic of her identity. She did not need ostentatious clothes to assert her worth. In fact, she resented the automatic assumptions that her dress or demeanor dictated her intelligence or background. It was a pressure that weighed heavily on many like her, an invisible barrier often assumed to be insurmountable. She pulled out her laptop and gazed at the glowing screen, an email from one of her mentors blinking patiently. They reminded her to stay grounded, stay curious, but also to embrace who she was: an innovator, a survivor, and a trailblazer. The words resonated deeper this evening. Emily's mind drifted to the moments of the day's confrontation. Professor Langston, with his polished demeanor and sharp tongue, had been an imposing figure of authority. Yet beneath his veneer, she now sensed the cracks, his rigidity threatened by perspectives that challenged his certainty. The elite students' sneers and laughter reflected a microcosm of societal assumptions, the automatic judgments cast on those who don't fit a narrow mold. But her acceptance and performance had disrupted that narrative. Her clear articulation, practical knowledge, and quietly confident demeanor had unsettled the dynamics of power and expectation. And it was only the beginning. Sitting quietly, Emily pulled a worn journal from the coffee table. Pages filled with her thoughts, plans, and dreams spilled out. There were strategies to expand Empower Next, ideas on integrating economic models with social impact assessments, and sketches for curriculum development. Each entry was an act of commitment, a piece of the quiet revolution she aimed to lead. Her phone buzzed briefly. A message from Julia, one of the elite students who had admitted her surprise and admiration in class. Would love to discuss some ideas further. Maybe we can work together. Emily typed back a quick response, a sense of hope bubbling within. Change would come not merely from confrontation but through connection, collaboration, and broken barriers. The night deepened around her as she prepared for rest, but her mind refused to quiet. She was no longer just a simple student in faded sweaters. She was a woman bridging worlds, reshaping preconceptions, and forging a path where intellect was measured by passion, insight, and resilience, not by privilege or appearance. Tomorrow, she'd return to the university with renewed purpose, aware of the challenges still ahead. But tonight, she allowed herself a quiet smile, the kind that grows from knowing who you truly are and embracing it fully. Emily's story was far from over. And in that was both power and promise. In the days following the lecture, word spread quickly across campus about the unexpected showdown between Emily Carter and Professor Langston. The story ricocheted through social circles, whispered in dorm halls, shared in the sprawling quad, and even made its way into the student newspaper's editorial section. What had begun as a humiliating challenge thrown by an Ivy League professor toward a modestly dressed student had emerged as a powerful statement against prejudice and narrow-mindedness. The university administration, previously silent on Langston's conduct, could no longer ignore the growing murmurs. Complaints arrived from both students and faculty, expressing concern about the professor's behavior, his condescending attitudes, public belittlement, and unwillingness to create an inclusive learning environment. After a thorough review, the university announced that Langston would be formally reprimanded for his unprofessional conduct. Though his impressive resume and long-standing tenure spared him immediate dismissal, it was clear his position had become precarious. Whispers circulated that an early retirement might be forthcoming. Langston himself was shaken. Those thin layers of academic pride that once insulated him now felt thin and fragile. He replayed the confrontation again and again, the clarity and poise Emily displayed, the way his students turned from mocking skeptics to genuine admirers. There was no room for the arrogance that had once defined him. Humility was now his uninvited companion. Some of the elite students, too, found themselves grappling with their own assumptions. Julia, who'd approached Emily after class, became a quiet advocate for change in the academic culture. Together with other like-minded students, they began organizing forums and roundtables on inclusion and unconscious bias, aiming to foster a community where varied backgrounds and voices were not only accepted but celebrated. Meanwhile, Emily's reputation blossomed beyond the Forbes cover. She was invited to speak at university events, joined panels on social entrepreneurship, and saw her nonprofit, Empower Next, gain new funding and volunteer support from students inspired by her story. Yet through it all, Emily maintained her grounded spirit, always quick to credit those who worked alongside her and never letting the limelight overshadow her mission. One crisp morning, she received an unexpected email from the university president herself, expressing admiration for Emily's courage and leadership. The message invited her to serve as a student representative on a newly established Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board. Recognizing the platform, Emily accepted, viewing the opportunity as another avenue to advocate for students who felt marginalized. Despite the external recognition, Emily remained focused on her work and the people who mattered most. She visited Empower Next's community center regularly, connecting with the young individuals whose lives depended on access and opportunity. Their determination fueled her own, a reminder of why appearances and first impressions should never dictate one's potential. The social dynamics on campus began to shift subtly. Where once Emily had been an anomaly, her example encouraged other students from diverse socioeconomic backgrounds to express their voices more freely. The walls that divided elite and outsider grew thinner with each honest conversation, each shared experience. One afternoon, as Emily exited a seminar, she noticed Professor Langston waiting nearby. His posture was hesitant, face marked with the lines of quiet reflection. He approached slowly. "Emily," he began, his voice softer than she'd expected. "I wanted to thank you. Your presence, your insights, they forced me to confront my own biases and complacency. I'm sorry for how I treated you. It was unprofessional and unfair." Emily studied him, the man who had been a formidable adversary, now showing vulnerability. She nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for saying that. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. I hope you'll join us in making the university a place where all students can thrive." He smiled faintly. "I intend to. And if you ever need a reluctant ally, well, I suppose I could try." The moment symbolized more than reconciliation. It was a testament to growth born from confrontation and understanding. Months later, during a campus-wide celebration of diversity and innovation, Emily stood on the stage accepting an award for her contributions to social impact and education. The auditorium was packed, students from all walks of life, faculty, administrators, and even a few teary-eyed young people from Empower Next who had traveled to be there. As she spoke, Emily's words resonated with a humility and strength that captivated the audience. "I don't stand here because I am exceptional," she said, "but because I refuse to let others define me. We all have stories, journeys, and challenges that shape who we are. It's time to tear down the walls of prejudice and expectation so that every voice can be heard, every talent recognized." When the applause faded, the celebration spilled into the evening, with laughter, shared meals, and conversations that bridged divides that once seemed insurmountable. That night, as the festivities wound down, Emily found herself reflecting on the journey. From that daunting lecture hall to becoming a figure of inspiration and change, her path was never about proving something to others but about honoring the truths she carried within. Ever resilient, she had transformed embarrassment into empowerment, skepticism into support. And though she had won respect, more importantly, she had sparked a conversation that would ripple far beyond university walls. Before she left, Emily glanced toward a quiet corner where a few students gathered, their faces animated with ideas and hope. Among them was Julia, whose once skeptical gaze now gleamed with determination. The story of Emily Carter wasn't just about one student's triumph over prejudice. It was a call to recognize the potential in every individual, regardless of appearance or background. So, what would you do if you were in Emily's place? Would you fight to rise above judgment, or let doubts silence you? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. See you in our next story.